You are listening to the Toxic Mold Podcast with Steve Worsley, the toxic mold expert and your number one source for mold consulting and mitigation in the USA. Let's dive into a brand new episode. Before we get started on this episode, here's a not so short disclaimer. While all attempts have been made to verify the content provided in this podcast, neither the podcaster or the producers assume any responsibility for errors, omissions, or alternative interpretations of the issues discussed here. All information stated in this podcast is the opinion of Steve Worsley. Steve Worsley is a mold specialist with over 25 years of experience in the construction and mold industry. The Toxic Mold Podcast is for information sharing purposes only. The views expressed are those of the podcaster and his alone. These views should not be taken as expert instruction or commands. While there may be references to medical conditions and symptoms, all podcast episodes are the opinion of Steve Worsley, and any medical questions or concerns shall be addressed with the appropriate licensed medical professional or professionals. As the podcaster refers to different mold types, please be aware that Steve Worsley is not a microbiologist, and questions concerning mold specifics should be answered by the appropriate professional. Steve isn't, nor does he offer any legal advice. For any legal advice, you must speak with a lawyer. The listener is 100% responsible for his or her own actions. You can check out Steve's books on Amazon. Just go to Amazon and search for author Steve Worsley. You can also take Steve's courses on Udemy or Skillshare, and you can find out more about those at cnccontractorservices.com. Now, let's get to the episode.
Hello, you're listening to the Toxic Mold Podcast with myself, Steve Worsley, and we have my wife, Cassandra. It's 2025.
Yes, it is. Wow.
It's your birthday month.
It is. All month long.
The joys of having a January birthday. It's cold and...
I know. I was born in a blizzard.
Not a whole lot of fun to be had out there this time of year. I have a July birthday, so we...
Oh yeah, well you have the 4th of July celebration around your birthday.
The whole country celebrates.
Exactly.
So anyhow, January is Radon Awareness Month, and our listeners that have been listening, religiously, they know that we'll talk about radon. Does it have anything to do with mold? No. But the title of today's episode is Radon and Toxic Mold. So when you hear radon, what do you think of?
Gases.
So it's what radon is for our listeners. It's the natural decay product of uranium and radium.
So it's a gas.
The radon is a gas. So those two things in the soils, when they decay, they create radon. Radon is the leading cause of lung cancer next to smoking. I believe, and I can't remember for sure, but I believe it's about 20,000 people die every year of radon.
Oh, that's terrible.
Exposure. And, it's interesting because a lot of times, when someone that has never smoked gets lung cancer, the first thing we assume, maybe they were a closet smoker. That's not always true. Could be radon.
That's true.
And for our listeners, I think I've told this story before, but Joe Paterno, I believe was his name. He was the coach of Penn, and he died of lung cancer. And it came out that, maybe he smoked a little bit in his early 20s. But what they did was they did radon testing in his office at the university and his home. Mm-hmm. And they were both, I believe, and I could be wrong, but I think they were over 30 picocurie liters per hour, which PCIL is how radon is measured. Just like air pressure is PSI, radon is measured in picocurie liters per hour or working levels. That's way, way down in a rabbit hole I didn't need to go. But
does the Luft measure radon?
Yes.
Oh, it does?
Yes.
Oh, so we've never had an alarm for radon.
No, not in our home.
Okay.
But the reason why is the Luft kind of backtrack a little bit. Radon enters the home through the soils. Mm-hmm. That's why we test in the basement. You're supposed to test in the lowest livable level. So if you have a crawl space, you don't test in the crawl space. You test in the lowest livable level. Our Luft is on our main level.
Oh, so it wouldn't accurately predict radon issues because it's not on the basement level.
Exactly.
Oh.
When we first got it, we put it down here we didn't have radon concerns. If we had radon concerns, I have 2 CRMs, which is a continuous radon monitor. For our listeners, that's how we test professionally, which brings me full circle back to Sun Radon. That's how I came across the Luft. It's called a Luft, L-U-F-T, has 2 little dots over the U. I don't know what
I think that's German accent.
Yes, but that's how I came across it. But the Luft measures radon, air pressure, temperature, humidity, TVOCs, and ECO2.
And is that carbon dioxide?
Monoxide.
Monoxide.
I think.
But it also measures some form of carbon because that's where we get in the red.
Yeah, carbon monoxide is those are the gases from like a gas fireplace. ECO2 is what you breathe after you've inhaled. When you exhale.
Well, and I think just for the radon alone, investing in something like a Luft that comes with an app that records things that just by looking at it, if it's red, you know something's up. So you go check your app. I think it's a very helpful indoor air quality monitoring device to have.
Yeah, and ours seems to be red a lot.
It is.
And every time it's red, it's for the TVOCs.
So the carbon dioxide.
No. TVOCs those are volatile organic compounds.
Oh.
So the VOCs for our listeners, and we've done podcast episodes about it. VOCs by definition, this isn't accurate, I guess, from what I'm going to tell our listeners. But to me, it is paint, stains, colognes, deodorants, cooking smells, incense, that people burn, candles. Those are VOCs.
Okay, so we get in the red over that.
Yes.
Oh.
Which, for the most part, it's right next to our kitchen, so we think that, that's what it's from.
Is Pam nonstick spray a VOC?
Could be, yes.
Oh, we use a lot of Pam.
And I don't think it's from that, personally. But my point is that, and we kind of got down into a rabbit hole with the whole Luft. I think it's $250, $249. It is well worth it because it is a professional. Like I said, Sun Radon is who makes the CRMs that I have. And for our listeners, they're probably like, why is Steve even talking about this? I got certified as a radon tester years and years ago. I still do it, not very often, but I have 2 professional, they're pretty expensive machines that we test for radon. Sun Radon is who makes those.
Well, and I think one of the things to really hit home on is if someone's listening to this and they're like, yeah, I would much prefer to have something that I plug into my wall that's tied to an app that gives me more than just radon. It gives me humidity and a whole bunch of other things. And if I get it through Steve, then he'll actually look at my readings if I purchase it through him. To me, that's a win-win-win rather than going with the typical charcoal canister DIY kit. That's a one-time snapshot. I want something that monitors my home all the time.
Yeah, which brings up, so for our listeners, how can you test for radon? I just explained a CRM, continuous radon monitor. That's what we do professionally. Once again, they might find somebody that has lower prices, but I believe we charge $175, I believe.
Somewhere in there.
And it's because you have to go out to the property, leave the machine, I verify close home conditions, go over some paperwork with the homeowners. I set the machine up, it starts reading. We leave it there for at least 3 days. And then I got to go back. When I pick it up, I print the results right there on site. So they actually have the results right there. But my point is that's why I charge what I charge. Now, if I was going to one of my clients and they were here locally and I was going to do mold testing, we did a mold inspection, and they wanted a radon test, I can charge cheaper than that because all I have to do is go one time or go back one time to pick it up. So that's a way you can test is with a CRM. That's the professional's way. It's the most accurate. It takes a reading every hour. It has, the machines I have sensors on them so that if it gets moved or unplugged, which our listeners are probably like, why does that matter? When I was doing a lot of testing, I was doing it with a home inspection. So I was testing for the potential buyers to make sure that the radon was low enough. Mm-hmm. But anyhow, it has all those sensors. One of my machines actually gives us the air pressure and it gives us the humidity. And we can tell if the machine gets unplugged or moved.
Okay.
And so for the machine, I guess for those that don't understand it, we don't want the machine moved from where we set it up.
So literally for $200 or higher, you can have a professional come out and use the CRM to test for radon, or you could do a DIY charcoal kit yourself, which would be more like, what, $20?
Yeah, and keep in mind, so you can go to a hardware store and buy the DIY charcoal canister. It's called activated charcoal. It's just literally this little circular thing, looks like a ant or some sort of little trap. You just set that. It's got to be 20 inches off the ground. There's a bunch of ways and where you should test. But anyhow, you buy that from the hardware store. You do it on your own. When you're done with that, you have to send that off to a lab for them to analyze it. And I guess my point is for our listeners, what you're paying at Home Depot or Lowe's or Ace, that $20 that you paid to get the kit does not cover the lab fees.
Okay.
So you're going to have to pay another whatever the lab charges.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
So that $20 is just for the kit. It's not for the lab fees or to get the results.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it's a charcoal canister is not as accurate as a CRM. Once again, I explained the CRM. It's taking a reading every hour, and it's going to, like for our listeners, it's important to understand if you get radon testing done with a continuous radon monitor, it's gonna spike and come up and down. That's totally normal. Because it is a gas, the air pressures will dictate how much those gases are coming out of the soils. That makes sense?
It does. So my question for you is the Luft, because it gives you continuous readings over as long as you've got it plugged in, is it as accurate, less accurate, or more accurate than the CRM?
I would say it's less accurate, but I don't know how much. Now, if it was brand new, it's just as accurate as a CRM.
Okay.
But as far as accuracy, I would have to do what we call a spike test, and I would have to set my radon monitor up, which we wouldn't do because it's in a hallway. I would have to put one of my CRMs right next to it to test to see how accurate it is.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
That does make sense.
So, but on the other hand, for our listeners, if you're going to hire a professional, $200, you might as well buy the Luft from our affiliate link, which we'll explain that at the end of the episode. You might as well just buy one of those and get Sun Radon, who manufactures the Luft, is the same company we buy our CRMs from.
Absolutely.
But the reason why, so just kind of go a little deeper, I don't know for sure if it's less accurate, but the reason why I can say at first it's accurate is they're calibrated. So you can trust, as our listener, if you buy that unit, you can trust what it's telling you.
Well, and I kind of like the idea of if somebody's listening to this and they're planning to buy a home, definitely as part of a home inspection, make sure you have somebody who for an additional fee can do a radon inspection. And then if you
It's just a test.
A radon test. But then if you choose to purchase the home, put a Luft in.
Exactly.
So you had the baseline from the actual radon test, and then the Luft will you'll know how accurate it is. Because you did the radon test.
Yeah. And next week, we're going to talk about radon mitigation. So we'll probably touch on this again. But for our listeners, if you're going to buy a home and you're hiring a home inspector and you want to pay that inspector to do a radon test, make sure they're doing it with a CRM.
Oh, okay.
Don't do the charcoal test.
Oh, do people who do radon tests use the charcoal?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Home inspectors?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I saw it all the time.
Okay.
So our listeners are like, well, then why don't I just do it myself? I have no idea. But when I did home inspections, that's why I got certified as a radon tester. We only tested with CRMs. Because once again, if you think about a charcoal canister, how accurate is that? And the way they analyze it, the radon, at the bottom of that, and it's inside so you can't see it, there's like a plastic dish in there. And the radon, because, I don't know, I'm not going to get into the science side, makes little marks on that plastic. So when the lab analyzes it, that's how they determine what the radon levels were. And my point is how do they know hour for hour what it was doing? They don't.
They don't, yeah. So that's interesting. Okay, so definitely if you're going to have a professional do a radon test, it should be using a CRM.
Yep, a continuous radon monitor. And on top of that, so let's say that our listener's going to buy a new home, they hire a home inspector and they want a radon test. If you use that charcoal canister and your inspector sets it up down in your basement, puts it on a little stand or whatever, because it's got to be off the ground, how do you know if the seller of the home, who's probably living in it, how do do you know if they moved it?
You don't.
Which, for our listeners, like, that's why we use CRMs. We can actually see if it's moved. And if you're wondering, it happened numerous times that the homeowner moved it.
Okay.
How did we prove that? Well, we didn't have to prove it, but it had a power failure, which our CRMs have backup batteries. Mm-hmm. So they'll run if the power goes out. But it had a sensor. It has a sensor in it if it gets moved. Well, what would happen is let's say I set it up at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday. If I had a power failure at noon or 4 o'clock the same day and a movement sensor failure, and then, so let's say they took it out of their basement and then they moved it out to their garage. Before I come back to pick it up on Friday, then I would see another power failure and a movement.
Oh, okay.
So we could literally tell, like, can I definitively say, yeah, they moved it? Well, I heard excuses like my cat bumped it or whatever. My point is you could see it got moved after I set it up, and it got moved back to where I had it before I got back there.
Oh, got it. So at the end of the day, it's really important to get a professional to do a radon test using a CRM. So what's your call to action for people?
Well, we're talking about it. Like, get your home tested for radon.
Yep.
And for listeners, if you're not buying a new home, buy the Luft. And I'll put the link in the the description of the podcast episode. But make sure, just go buy a Luft and you can kill two birds with one stone. Monitors the radon, and it really pays attention to the humidity. Well, those are the two things that really matter.
And just a disclaimer, Steve offers, what would you call it? Just analysis of the Luft results a review if you use the link that's going to be in the podcast description. If you just go to Sun Radon and you buy the Luft and then you email Steve and say, hey, can you review it? The answer will be no, because you did not use his link. So please be sure you use Steve's link.
Yeah, I could still review it. I'm just going to charge you.
Exactly.
And there's also, we talked about it last week, go to cnccontractorservices.com. On the far right, I can't remember what tab it is, but if you click on the far right tab, it'll be a drop down that says resources. If you click on that, it'll pull up a list of links for videos, products, and Luft is in there.
Perfect.
So there's no excuse for our listeners. If you're buying a new home, make sure you have a radon test. If you're not, go out and buy the Luft. It'll be well worth the money spent.
Absolutely.
All right. We appreciate all of you listeners. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Make sure you go to our website at cnccontractorservices.com and sign up for the mold investigation checklist. Again, go to cnccontractorservices.com and get your free mold investigation checklist today. You can also, on cnccontractorservices.com, find out more about Steve's courses and books and consultations. Once again, go to cnccontractorservices.com.